Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show here on YouTube. New episodes air every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time with individual interviews posted throughout the following week. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain, to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So without further ado, let's get it on. Okay, welcome all you sisters and brothers, all you citizens of the world. It's Michael James and time for another Live from the Heartland show. Today, I'm going to have two of my favorite guests. They're also producers and sometimes hosts. That'll be Katy Hogan and Thom Clark. And before we get to the two of them, I'd like to just let everyone know that Val Kilmer passed away. Some of you remember him from Batman and other movies. I remember him from Thunderheart, which was kind of based on the takeover by the American Indian movement at Wounded Knee. And I'd like to share also that a recent guest on our show, Del Marie Cobb, she has a PR firm and works with progressive candidates, and her company just turned 35 years old. And you can find that interview if you go to the youtube.com/Heartland Media site. One good thing for me, two good things for me. One, a lot of you people are wondering when the book about the Heartland Cafe is coming out. And I just want to say that Katy Hogan and I are working on it. We're just about done with that first draft, and we'll be sending it around to some interested parties. Closer to home and right away, I have just completed a new book called En la Frontera, El Paso y Juarez, Basketball in the Barrio. And it's a book of about 75 pages of photographs, and it'll be off the presses soon. And hopefully those of you who want to help support this show will get a copy when we do our spring fundraiser, which is coming up. With all that said, let's turn to our two guests, and I'm really glad to have them here with me. It used to be a time when all three of us would drive downtown. We'd work out a script beforehand. We'd go over things. Now it's, I get them when I can, and I'm really glad to have them today. And let's start off with Katy Hogan, who I'm sure has something really wonderful to talk about. Hi, Katy.
Yeah, good morning, Michael. Good morning, Tom. Today is the day after Wisconsin voters stood up and gave the middle finger salute to Melon Fusk. I couldn't be happier. There's nobody I wanted to give a bad day to than that particular character. But the best part about it is they've got an actual qualified, decent human being going to the Supreme Court, which is more than I can say for all the members of the cabinet that were just appointed and approved and various department heads. So it's really nice to have that affirmed by those smart Wisconsin voters who showed up in record numbers, by the way, in an off-time election. As you know, and your listeners probably know if they're regular, we worked again with Operation Swing State, along with partners, Indivisible, Movement, Left, I forget all the people, lots of Democratic parties, offices from the North Side we were working with. And we sent a lot of people up every single weekend and knocked many, many doors. And so there was, and we actually, last weekend, we actually met the judge. She kicked off the launch in Milwaukee, which was very exciting for the about 200 canvassers that were gathered waiting to hear her speak. So that was great. And she's wonderful.
Susan Crawford is the name, right?
Susan Crawford. Yes. Sorry, I didn't mention it. You're right to remind me of that instead of mentioning the ignoramus's name first, even if I mixed it up a little bit. And people are, also were reacting with disappointment to the Florida races. But I just have to say, those two races were always going to be a big reach. Those two districts, very, very red. And the good news is those voters, too, totally encroached on the Trump numbers by 10 or more percent. Very significant. So it was a great effort, and it'll set the stage for future efforts by those same voters. And I think between all the action in the street when we started last week here in Rogers Park, I think Tom's going to talk about that a little bit. But we call it the Visibility Brigade, and we're encouraging everybody to do that. So I'll step off of that.
I'll just say congratulations, Katie, and all the other folks who worked so hard in Wisconsin. I think the results, even in Florida, show the emperor has no clothes. He did not bring people along at all, and I think the Muscovite is really beginning to burn bridges that they're going to have trouble rebuilding. I've hoped since November that they would overplay their hand so quickly that there would be a reaction, and maybe what I'm taking some solace out of yesterday's results is that maybe that has started now. And we'll see if we can get more judges to rule more quickly, although I don't know that any of them have an army to enforce their rulings. But if there's a preponderance of decisions against the regime, I think we may be getting someplace. We can't afford to wait for midterms elections. We got to be making more inroads before then. And I think the Wisconsin results yesterday are just really exciting, along with the attention that Cory Booker got with his marathon speech in the Senate. I would hope that people will take to heart his training for this. He stopped eating last Friday and stopped drinking on Sunday so that he would enter into this dehydrated to begin with. For those people wondering, how do you go to the bathroom during a 24-hour speech? And my answer to that is it depends. But
I was wondering if he had a tube down his leg.
I think it was a very exciting Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of moment, and we ought to be seeing it every friggin' week.
I want to just say one thing about Musk. The Elon Musk's backlash.
Must we?
I'm going to do it. The backlash turns into global sales slump for Tesla. And our friend Mike Klonsky, who does Hitting Left with the Klonsky brothers, or whatever he's calling it these days, he said Elon Musk has announced plans to exit Dodge in May, claiming that the most of the damage required to achieve his $1 trillion goal will be done by then. He goes on to say that during his brief tenure, Musk's personal wealth has surged dramatically, reportedly increasing by 82% to a staggering $420 billion, despite Tesla's stock taking a hit. This stark contrast between his growing fortune and the struggle of those affected by his cuts has led to mass protests, with many questioning the fairness, equity, and legality of the process. But his enormous wealth and his power to buy so many elected officials have enabled him to skate accountability. Let's hope that's coming to an end.
Well, they did in Wisconsin yesterday, big time.
Yeah, they did. They really socked it to him. It was a great victory. I'm glad we did it. Do either of you want to comment on Myanmar and Thailand and the earthquake over there and the response to it? I mean, it's pretty tragic watching it on the TV.
What's tragic is the inability of the United States of America to respond to a humanitarian crisis, though China showed up right away. They're in the news. Their crews are helping out. And once again, the wannabe emperor has no coattails, no clothes, nothing to show for this. I mean, USAID can't respond because it's been decimated. And, that's normally how we would do soft diplomacy. And, this clown car government is not interested in that.
You got anything, Katie? I know you've been watching the TV.
Yeah, I mean, we all saw, if we watched it on NewsHour a couple nights ago, a former, I think he was actually in the first Trump administration, describing the difference it makes on the ground, specifically in places like Myanmar, where no one can get to. The Chinese can because they're right next door. And, all of us laymen on the ground are pretty clear that everywhere we create a void, China is stepping in. The multifaceted U.S. aid, which covered everything from helping stop Ebola virus from spreading from its starting place to the disaster relief to kind of regularly being counted on to feed a whole slew of hungry people. Where are we? We are not there. And I don't know. Maybe, we all know Trump is not a patriot and a tool of the Soviet, of Putin. But is he also a tool for China? He's just a tool. That's right.
Yeah, we'll call him a tool. And I know that not only was China there in big time, so was Russia and a number of other places, people from India around the world. It's really quite a situation. I contacted two former Rogers Park friends, Bill Page, who lives in Thailand, and Jeffrey Orr, who also lives in Thailand, to see how they were doing.
What did they say?
They're both okay. And what Jeffrey said, I couldn't find what Bill said, but he said all good in the south of Thailand. Friends in Bangkok are shook up, but they seem to be okay. The only building that collapsed was the government state audit department that was being built by a joint venture with Chinese State Railway Company. And apparently the rebar in that construction was substandard and led to the building coming down. It says typical corruption over here, and there are dozens of dead workers because of it. And then he went on to say he's going to Da Nang to see an old friend, hopes all well back here in the 49th Ward. Speaking of the 49th Ward, Thom, you have a wonderful wife who is real active in Third Act, and you may have been dragged into it too by your friends and neighbors, but it's quite an outfit, and we did a lot of work. Katy going up to Wisconsin, a lot of other people we know. There's a lot more work to be done, as Thom was pointing out. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Third Act and what's on their agenda?
Third Act is a national organization of elders trying to preserve the environment for our grandkids. We are activists. We are also, we hope influencers want to use our talents and our experience to try to make a difference. The Illinois chapter of Third Act has grown to over 300 volunteers over just the last couple of years. And there are, in fact, a lot of Rogers Park folks in the leadership. thirdact.org/Illinois is the best way for you to find out more. Their current activity is trying to get the state pension fund to divest of big oil investments. The less we take out of the ground, the more likely it is that we will stop affecting our atmosphere as much as we are, which is causing all the global climate crises that we're looking at. There's a lobby day in Springfield in May. I believe it's on the 21st. Third Act will be there in a big way. But they're also planning a Sunday in September 20th and 21st, to celebrate what we're ultimately trying to get at, which is cheap energy that doesn't destroy the earth. And it's a very potent organization, gaining more allies every day. thirdact.org/Illinois. You can find out more. I also want to plug couple of other local activities. Katy was involved with organizing neighbors to have a presence during Friday morning rush hour at Greenleaf and Sheridan. And on the west part of the ward, we are starting that Thursday evening rush hour at Pratt and Ridge.
When we started it last week, we started it with a sign making night at the local political headquarters here on Morse Avenue, which has been such a gift of a place to organize from. I want to say thank you to Maria and thank you to Kelly Cassidy for allowing us to over and over again utilize that office. Last night on my own, I went to roll white paint on Maria's former yard signs because they have a date on them. She can't use them again. And so they're sitting there, 10 of them on 2 tables. And tonight, hopefully, they'll be dry enough for people to make their new signs. The problem is signs are not big enough to actually express all of the variety of outrage that we feel. I mean, you have to pick 1 or 2 at the most, if you want to do both sides of the sign. You, Michael, and Paige and I went downtown on the L for the first Federal Plaza gathering I don't know, was it a month ago? And I made a sign on the L. I just grabbed a piece of cardboard and went out and I made a sign on the L that was, just this big. And it said, "The Emperor has no clothes." And the other side of it said, "And it's really not a good look." Which was wonderful because we have to maintain our joy.
Yeah.
We have to use it as a defense against the despair that we can fall into. I mean, just this week, a couple of days ago, I actually I had a morning where I could not cry. And that was the first time I had just let it drop. And there was no additional, everything we've been reading for, since January 20th has been despairing and awful and angering. But some reason it just hit me that day. And Thom, you and I shared this. Did you have that experience as well?
Yes, it hit me yesterday, and I know exactly why, because of Cory, in part. I paid a lot more attention to the news yesterday than I have, and it weighed down on me really heavy. I think it's really important for all of us to maintain our sanity and good energy while we're being inundated every hour with another nasty headline. We have to pick our moments, as I've been saying since the election. We need to rest, listen, discern, collaborate, and make good trouble to the extent we're able, because that's how we're going to, I think, stay alive this next period of time. And to the extent we can do it in a joyful way, some of my housemates celebrated Trans Day out in Oak Park. And how do they do it? Dancing down the street with music and off at Scoville Park. They basically were all around downtown Oak Park, and it was a joyful parade, which was the whole point. And I think that's the kind of energy we need to bring into this really downward spiral our democracy is now in.
I'd like to share a little bit of information. There would be an opportunity for people who are concerned about all these issues to join I understand there's going to be a big demonstration downtown on Saturday the 5th, so if you're listening to the show either on the radio or streamed on Friday morning or Saturday morning, you can get downtown if you so desire. And it's going to be in Daley Plaza, and I bet there's going to be a big turnout. I'm not sure of the weather. We're getting big rainstorms right now. They talk about snow, but I bet the weather is good enough for a number of people to gather there.
Hey, the Trans March on Sunday, which was the first of its kind, and such a joyful, colorful, beautiful community gathering. And our state rep, Kelly Cassidy, was on the dais. She gave a fiery speech. And if they could march through the pouring downpour that they did, I think that the many hundrds of thousands of people, and Saturday, is a national day of demonstration. It's going to be from sea to shining sea, and lots of people everywhere. It should very much lift people's spirits to see one another caring about the democracy again.
And let me just mention that if for some reason those of you on the north side can't make it downtown, you can go to Fountain Square in Evanston also on Saturday to participate in what is a national day of protest on April 5th.
Right.
All right. So we have a few minutes left, my fellow sometimes hosts and producers of this show. And I have a list of things that I'm going to fire it off. And you can, if any
Can
of you
you assign them so we don't speak at the
yeah,
same
well,
time?
just what they are. I'm a little bit interested in how Mayor Brandon Johnson is doing. I know he went to D.C. and had to talk in front of these Republican and Democrat Congress people. There's also PBS got called in before the House. We have a situation with just drastic behavior on the part of the Trump regime in deporting people. We have a measles epidemic.
Wait,
On
stop
the
right
earth.
there. Stop
Okay,
right there.
which one do
Because
you want, Kate?
I'm going to take the deportation because
Go.
it's terrible. It's what we used to call extraordinary rendition. It's if they keep it up, you can kiss the Bill of Rights goodbye. Everyone has to make big noise about this every day. They're stealing people, and I don't care if they are quote unquote guilty in the eyes of ICE. There has to be due process. That's kind of the main thing in this country. One of the main things. And if we give that up without a holler, well, we deserve what we get. We need to holler about that stuff, particularly when they're willy-nilly just taking people off the street, half of whom have done nothing. Maybe they've demonstrated against something that the felon in office is for or is against. You know, maybe they're going against his line. That doesn't work that way in America. Okay, I just wanted you to stop the fire hose, Michael. It was getting a bit
Just
much.
giving you guys an opportunity to choose
Right.
your topic.
Except you didn't. Brandon was your first point, and Brandon got a contract with the school, and we'll see how they're going to pay for it. But you know, when he ran for the office, I wasn't sure why he wanted the job, and I think he's learned why some of us were concerned about him taking that job on. It's a tough situation he inherited, but I don't think he's handled it well. We'll see how things turn out. There are already people lining up to run against him. But I think, you know, we're looking at with all the stuff that's happening on the federal level, the state, the county, and the city are going to be really scrambling to try to pay their bills.
Yeah.
Particularly on contracts that were already in place that they're not getting reimbursed for. The layoffs at Health and Human Services will make this a deadlier, sicker nation than we could probably ever imagine. And it could happen really quickly given the spread of the measles epidemic in Western Texas, because the clown car guys in charge don't believe in vaccines to protect people. So I guess we're all just going to get measles again.
One thing I didn't get to ask, but I want to put it on our agenda because it'll be a topic we're going to talk about, is the ongoing Israeli-American war against the people in Gaza. And
the West Bank.
And I think it's going to have serious ramifications for going forward, because it divides the world, and it certainly has divided people at home. And I think it will continue to do that unless we get a grip on it and the Democrats are able to really counter some of the most negative things going on in the name of this country or the support by us. I think that we have to figure out a way to have this a topic that can be talked about in a decent and fair way.
Well, maybe Netanyahu, not unlike 47, is a ruler sitting in office who is also a criminal. And the kind of things that are being said about how October 7th was actually allowed to happen, all the way up to people who have been dehoused, dehumanized, starved, raped, and pillaged, are now marching in their bombed into the Stone Age surroundings in Gaza and the West Bank, saying no to Hamas. where is mainstream media on this stuff?
I have to go
only
to
see
Al
it.
Jazeera. I
Go
have to
ahead.
go to Al Jazeera in order to find out what's going on in the Middle East. I mean, I
Yeah.
think we're so distracted by the domestic mess the regime is doing that we're not paying as much attention as we should be to international things. And, you know, the Palestinians just have not risen up very high on people's consciousness to be concerned about. But, and
Well,
obviously the current regime will allow the leadership of Israel to do whatever it wants to. I'm very nervous about a broader scale breakout of war, unless, ironically, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan end up having more influence in trying to forge a better situation than we see right there.
Tom, you mentioned Al Jazeera. I don't know if all of our listeners or viewers know about Al Jazeera, but if you go to online, you can get the paper. There's not a charge right now, and they have really great news. And also, I watch a lot of Al Jazeera on the TV these days. We're running out of time. I'll give you each about 15 seconds if you have something else you want to say to encourage the world. There we go. You're holding up a picture of "I am stealing from you," and it's some guy that's used to be from South Africa. He came here, dropped out of school.
he's a Nazi. He's a Nazi.
He's a Nazi. Okay, Tom, you got any parting words?
I'd like to move beyond concentrating on the Nazi and trying to do whatever we can locally to keep people energized, focused, collaborative, as well as helping our neighbors stave off any assaults by the government.
That's right.
All right. I really love seeing you two on a rainy morning here in the 49th Ward. And I'll have you back on the show before you know it. Everybody else, stay tuned. We've got another guest coming on, a fellow named Jefferson Mok, who I met recently, not too long ago. And he's got me involved in a project in Uptown. And we're just going to pump him for some information. Be right back with more Live from the Heartland here on the left end of your dial, or however
Thank you, Michael.
the show.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
boy.
See y'all in a few. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for April 4th in the year 2025. I'm still Michael James. I'm still up here in the 49th Ward, still very blue. And my next guest is someone who I met just a few months back, and I believe he showed up at my front porch gallery. He may have had a little communication with me before then. But as some of you know, because I keep talking about it, on nice warm days during the summer, on Sundays, I have my front porch gallery with my photos and books. And this young fellow named Jefferson Mok showed up. And I think we ended up getting to know each other through Tamara Smith of Charles Kerr Publishing. And Jefferson and I, we've hit it off. He came by with his wonderful dog one time, and we had a couple of meals together down in Uptown, a few other places. We've been driving around in my car, sometimes in his car, taking photographs. I thought he would be a very good person for our listeners and viewers to know about, because he's pretty active and has a good head on his shoulders. So with all that said, good day to you, Jefferson.
Good day, sir.
So let me ask you first off, how did we meet? Did I get that right?
Yeah, so it was an introduction from our mutual friend, Tammy Smith, with whom I worked at the Heartland Alliance about, I want to say, more than 15 years ago. Wow. And I was working at the National Immigrant Justice Center 2006 to 2008, working in the political asylum unit, the project where we would find attorneys around Chicago to represent people who are seeking political asylum to stay in the U.S. And oftentimes they were fleeing some form of persecution. And so these attorneys would take these cases pro bono. And Tammy was working as the executive assistant to the president of Heartland Alliance, which was the umbrella organization for the National Immigrant Justice Center and a whole host of other agencies, which probably Chicagoans will have heard about in the last 10, 15 years about that whole collapse and aftermath. But anyway, Tammy was always super kind, so bright, and always just a great conversationalist. So I stayed in touch with her. Even after I left the National Immigrant Justice Center, I stayed with Heartland Alliance and then worked on a pilot project they were launching in East Africa. And that was a project that the president of Heartland Alliance, Sid Moan at the time, was very engaged with and wanted to stay very connected with. And so Tammy was often in communication with me and learned a lot about what I was doing. And so we became friends through that. And so many years later, when I moved back to Chicago in 2021, I remember reaching out to her, just thinking about this area that I'm living in, Buena Park, which is part of Uptown. Just thinking about the history of the place, thinking about getting connected to people who know the area, work on different projects. I know, like you said, Tammy works with Curb Publishing, and so just wanted to talk about, hey, who are some of the people I should know? Who are some of the people doing interesting things around here? And she's like, there's somebody you should meet. And he used to be very active in Uptown.
Yeah, I was. And I'm glad that he put us in touch. My history in Uptown goes back to 1964. When the summer of 64, I had just graduated from Lake Forest. I had the summer off before I went to start my graduate studies at Berkeley. I had a job working for some anthropologists out of Notre Dame, a guy named Mel Diamond. I don't know what ever happened to that project, but I spent a lot of time under the L tracks with these former Kentucky miners, a one-armed guy named Penny Menser who could roll cigarettes with one hand. And these guys would hand me, a little half pint of Jim Beam or Jack Daniels or something. It was quite a summer. It opened my eyes. And then I came back a couple of years later to work in an STS, Students for Democratic Society project called Join Community Union. And we did rent strikes and with welfare mothers and march on the police station, that kind of thing. So I have a lot of time I spent in Uptown. But before we get into more Uptown stuff, I'd like you to tell us about what it was like going to Burundi and having a radio show. What was it like? How did you end up there? What's Burundi like? And what did you do on your radio?
Yeah, that's a good lead in. I feel like, one of the things you told me recently was that a lot of things that you worked on ended up kind of falling in your lap. Almost like you're a guy who, for whom things just happen, right? Or to whom. And I feel like in some ways, the way that I've structured my career in life, there's a similar pattern. And I think this is maybe one of the things that helps us connect. So the work in East Africa and Burundi, like I said, I was working with National Immigrant Justice Center. After 2 years, I was thinking about grad school, but I didn't really want to transition from working in an office to a classroom environment, which then was really studying about the places that maybe I want to eventually work in. And the opportunity came up to launch this pilot project for Heartland Alliance through a State Department grant that was going to leverage a lot of their expertise in mental health care, post-conflict trauma care. They already had a project in Rwanda, neighboring Rwanda. And what they were going to try to do was set up a center for the rehabilitation and reintegration of female former child soldiers. And so I didn't want to go to grad school. And I said, hey, I speak French. This is a Francophone country. I have some country condition research experience now and understand some of the contextual issues in that region. Can I go? You don't even have to pay me. You just have to support me to get there and stay in touch. And it was a real chance happening that I actually met the person working on that grant and that project, who had just taken over that project in the Heartland Alliance office. I met him in the elevator. He had just moved to Chicago, and we talked about it, and he knew what my situation was and also my background. And so over the course of a couple months, we decided, yes, they would send me to go and launch this project, which, given the fact that programs like these take a couple years to process, from grant application to acceptance to eventually receiving the funding, it can be a year or two in some cases. And so by the time I got to Burundi, the original application was pretty dated. And what I learned pretty quickly on the ground was that a lot of the things that we talked about in the application were no longer applicable. Some of the project partners weren't really operational. Some didn't exist. And so I essentially had to relaunch the project using that template of the framework of the model that was outlined in the application. But I essentially started Heartland Alliance's office in Burundi and then eventually in neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. And, these are very much projects that fit within the humanitarian assistance, post-conflict development framework, which have received a lot of criticism over the years, right? They're often big money projects that don't really trickle down to helping local communities. And so there's a lot of discussion about, the actual impacts or harm even that humanitarian aid could produce in doing work like that. Our project was smaller. It was a pilot and hired all local staff to deliver the services. I feel like we had some flexibility to do things that bigger agencies like the UN couldn't do in terms of making those connections. But at the same time, I was deeply aware that those industry harms could exist. And so after a couple years of running that project and living in Burundi, the macro narrative about this post-conflict place that really needed a lot of assistance, getting back on its feet, helping the population out, was conflicting. It was clashing with my micro experience of living in this capital city that was pretty vibrant, a lot of youthful energy of students and young professionals trying to rebuild the country on their own. The country was shifting away from its Francophone past to its Anglophone future. And you saw a lot of people teaching themselves English and starting up little clubs all over the place to really take their own destinies in their hands. And I feel like that story wasn't being told, both at that micro level and that individual level, which ultimately would lead to the sort of macro level, the future of the country. And so I started this radio show that, very much was about, let's tell some of these stories. Let's think about the development that's happening on the ground, but that also could serve as a proxy way of storytelling about the country's future. So, one of the things we did was we'd go around town and review restaurants. And that was a wonderful way of glimpsing the entrepreneurship that was happening, the creativity that was happening, but also a really interesting way to understand social, cultural, and even political dynamics in the ways that people engage with their customer base, talk to each other, the types of food they served. So it was a radio show that I feel like, for me, was sort of the counterpoint to the day job that I had in the humanitarian aid industry. And I ended up leaving at the end of my contract of the aid work with Heartland Alliance and continued doing the radio show when I got a grant from my alma mater, Grinnell College, and continued that for about a year and a half.
Before we go back to Uptown, you just went back to Hong Kong, where your parents are from. And I don't know, were you from there originally, or were you from?
Yeah, I was born there. And so our family emigrated in 87. My mom in 86 through a work visa But I don't know, people don't realize this, but with work visas, it's not like the whole family just gets to come over. It's a really difficult process where my mom had to come over for a year by herself and then wait for the kids to get permission to emigrate a year later. So we've been separated for a year. And then my dad could come a year after that. So really, this was a 2-3 year process of the family being fractured. But ultimately, yeah, we emigrated, between 86, 87. And so my parents, all of us are naturalized citizens now, but my parents were born in Hong Kong. Although they have pretty interesting histories of emigrating to Hong Kong from southern China themselves. My mom's family had to flee the Communist Party in China when they were sweeping down. And they essentially let my mom's family escape because they coveted her apartment and they wanted to take over. And they're like, oh, yes, of course, we'll let you leave. Please leave the keys.
Well, you just went back home to visit some family. What can you tell us? We got a few minutes before we go back to Uptown, but how about telling us what's going on in Hong Kong? What are people thinking about the United States, their own situation, et cetera?
Yeah, I think what I'm not an expert in the sense of like being a China watcher, so I don't want to go too far into the politics of it. But what I will say from the lived experience of participating in a lot of conversations, this was also the time when USAID was being essentially, just dismantled and shut down. And so there was a lot of conversation about the international dynamics, what China's move would be in terms of taking over some of the leadership of these international institutions, which I think people don't really realize how important leadership in, organizations like the World Trade Organization or the World Bank, like the various leadership levels oftentimes have been staffed by American citizens. And that's changing, whether it's things like space travel or intellectual property rights and who writes those rules. The U.S. abandoning leadership in these areas is creating opportunities for countries like China. And China is very keen on seizing some of these roles because they know that rulemaking is ultimately where a lot of that power lies. So I think a lot of people were thinking about, what are the next moves in terms of that region and how they'll respond to this vacating of leadership by the U.S. But I also found it interesting that, the perspective is completely different there. When in the U.S. we talk about, oh, you have to hear, all sides of the conversation or both sides, and oftentimes when we hear somebody saying both sides, they're kind of elevating the conservative or right wing, narrative to equate with whether it's science or certain realities. Where in Hong Kong, when people were doing that, when they were saying you have to hear both sides, they were actually elevating more of the progressive or liberal narratives because the dominant narrative they would be receiving would be the official one. So for them, it's almost like they had to make the extra effort to get past the Trump or the, American official line and then say, oh, but, we should consider these progressive considerations and ultimately like some of the bigger impacts or harms that a lot of people will suffer as a result of these changes. And so it's almost like, that extra effort creates a barrier or a layer of obstacle for people to get that fuller picture beyond the Trump narrative. And so I found that to be interesting, that the resistance to a Trump narrative was almost the minority opinion here.
That's a lot of information that I don't know much about Hong Kong, but I'm, we've had a few go back and forth. I always had rooted for Mao Zedong and, the Chinese Revolution. And, I'm tempering some of my earlier thoughts, but I still find it all pretty interesting and sometimes inspirational.
We'll keep talking about that. We'll keep talking about that. Yeah.
Let's go back to Uptown. first of all, what actually brought you back? And then more importantly, you've been doing some work up there, maybe some things you want to share about that. And I know you had something you wanted to tell us about the Illinois Humanities Council. So take a shot at it, including what you expect me to be doing with you when we ride around.
Yeah, so I moved back to Chicago in 21 after about 15 years away. And I had a couple places in mind to live near. And Uptown was one of the top places for me, both because of its proximity to the lake, the Asia on Argyle corridor, which is a corridor that my family had been going to for about 30, 40 years, because it's a much closer proxy to Asian culture and Asian foods than Chinatown. So for us to access it from the suburbs, we would often go down there. And over time, my mom learned a lot about the Southeast Asian community, learned about some of the influences and connections to Hong Kong, because a lot of Vietnamese refugees who fled were ethnically Chinese, or some even passed by Hong Kong on the way to the U.S. So just thinking about all of these things and coming back to Chicago, I thought a lot more about place, history, where I was living specifically, and meeting you and having that conversation with Tamara about just how am I going to learn about this place that I'm going to put down roots in and really call home, and how am I going to help build the community that I want to live in, which is, something I say at the end of every cover letter for a job or something, right? Like, I'm excited about applying here because I really want to build the community that I'm going to be a part of. And so I started to look at Uptown history, and it went much farther than the Southeast Asian corridor on Argyle Street, to thinking about how Uptown's diversity stretches back to, your era.
Yeah,
And you call me young, but I'm
country bars on Argyle. It was like
exactly right. Right. And you have West African immigrants all along Broadway and Wilson. You have, you don't see it much now, but people talk about there used to be a strong Native American presence here. The original Rainbow Coalition, as I learned through your work and just studying about the history. This past weekend or 2 weekends ago, I attended a brilliant historical presentation about the Buena Park area, which is where I live, finding out that my specific lot was a very significant place in that time. And so just all of these things fire up the curiosity that I have to make history a more multidimensional experience. So, we read about it in books and it's like bolded text or bullet points. We start to go to museums and you get a deeper sense of artifacts and maybe some of the tactile experience. But when talking to you, I think for me, what's super astonishing and impressive is you give me a feel for connections, for the relationships that you had, your recall of names and places and things that people did and how they connected each other and those networks. That's a kind of tactile experience that's more abstract, but that I think really fits the moment. Because not only do I want to know how neighborhoods used to feel like, I want to know how people used to go about those neighborhoods interacting with each other. And so when I think about, for example, the Southeast Asian community around Argyle Street and, settling into that area around the late 60s, 70s, what was the connection to the work you were doing around the 60s and 70s? It's almost like we have these communities in a historical sense kind of distinct from each other. But I want to know more about what those connections were like. I want to know more about how those changes and developments took place. And I want these questions to help start to answer a lot of the questions I'm hearing now about what are we going to do now? What can we do now? What are the mutual aid energies that we're feeling, and how do we really help those rise to the moment and the challenges we're facing? And so I think there's an incredible intergenerational conversation that needs to happen. I think there's a lot of challenges we're facing now that we might not realize that people have encountered before, or at least a sense of being overwhelmed in a way that the late 60s absolutely was. All around the world was an incredible place of, foment and turmoil and all these things. And so what are the lessons that we can teach each other to move forward? That's really at the heart of this mini grant that I got from Illinois Humanities about activating history. And so it's about activating it for me, like I said, in that kind of relational way, mapping out these different relationships, thinking about the people and the things they've gone on to do. And so I think that kind of work will give us a different kind of roadmap to thinking about how we can approach the present moment.
Well, it's inspired me. I've been trying to dig up all my old Uptown photos, and of those by other people. There was actually a guy named Skeets Millard who there's a lot of stuff about him. He's long gone, but he took a lot of photos back in 1966, and I have those negatives, so I'm going to go to that. Nancy Hollander, who's been very active, she's Sissy Spacek, plays her in that movie about Guantanamo. She took a lot of Uptown photos. Diane Fager did. There's a number of people, so we're trying to dig those up, as well as you and I, last week, we were driving under those same L where I used to hang out with these old Southern guys, drinking and, learning how to roll cigarettes. We were in the same place driving under the L, taking pictures again. So it's kind of like, past and the present are unified. What do you want to say about the Illinois Humanities Council, and what do you want to say about our project that you want me to know?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it. There are different phases to it. So the title of the grant, Activating History, I think that's the moment we're in. I think it's also thinking about the next phase, which is connecting it to that intergenerational component. So we've activated, in some ways, learning more about your world and the changes taking place there. And I think there's a lot more for us to share. And I hope to organize an event in the coming months, hopefully next month, to talk about, go deeper on some of your work and that history specifically. But then, like I said, I immigrated here, so technically I am like first generation, but really I'm the second generation, right? And for a lot of my friends, especially this group that I've been volunteering with, High Bio Cares, up on Argyle Street, there is a changeover to the next generation in terms of how we carry on cultural preservation, in terms of carrying on traditions, and also really helping them adapt to the present and the future and bringing new people to it. I think this is where that's the next phase of what we do, is connecting your story to some of these newer stories and finding those conversations that need to take place there. And then hopefully the next phase, and this all really starts from that mindset of activating this history, your archives, like you mentioned, we need to get more time, resources to really dig up your basement and go through some of the stuff there, because it sounds like there's some really historically important stuff that belongs to everybody.
Could be, it's that'll be quite a task, and I'm looking forward to spending more time with you. Jefferson Mok, you're quite a guy. So all of you who are listening or viewing or, have the show before then, you may want to go check that out. I want to thank everybody who makes the show possible. Our first guest, Katy Hogan, Thom Clark, our engineer, Hal James, and our other guest, Jefferson Mok. We encourage you all to do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together, because together we can make a big difference. And there's no better time than right now. See you next week. Over and out. Power to the people. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21, or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Gone to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing